Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm going to be reviewing the newest album from Candlemass, The Door to Doom. This is a pretty big album for Candlemass, I would say. The band's last studio album, or was originally supposed to be the band's final album. Obviously that didn't end up being the case considering that we got this thing here. And this album had me excited for several different reasons. One of those reasons was that this thing seemed to be calling back to the band's debut album, Epicus Doomicus Metallicus, in more ways than one. For one thing, the band's original vocalist who performed on that album has returned to this album to perform as well. Not only that, but the album cover to this thing seems clearly inspired by the album cover for the original album. Between those two things and a feature from Tony Iommi on this thing, providing a guitar solo on one of the tracks, I was pretty excited to see what was going to be in store for me on this new album. Overall, I will say that this album ended up, at least to some extent, living up to the hype that I had coming into this thing. I wouldn't say that this album rivals the best albums that this band has put out in the past. However, I will say at the very least that this is a very good project still. Overall, I feel like this album pulls off that classic doom metal style that I really enjoy rather nicely. There's a lot of really standout moments spread across this thing. The track Astorilus, the Great Octopus, hope I'm saying that correctly. This track is the one that features Tony Iommi, who provides a guitar solo on this track, and overall this song is easily one of my favorites on the entire album. Not just for the guitar solo though, even though that is pretty great. The hook on this track is one that's really standout. It's pretty massive sounding, anthemic almost, and catchy as well. The riffs on this track are fantastic, and that guitar solo, which I do have to shout out, is pretty great as well. It's really cool to see Tony Iommi popping up on a Candlemass track and providing a really just stellar solo, really. This is definitely one of the highlight songs in the track listing, at least for me. The final track on the album, The Omega Circle, is another highlight for me personally. Once again, it has a pretty massive, catchy chorus to it, but at the same time manages to pull off those really dark, doomy, despair-inducing riffs that I really enjoy. And truth be told, a lot of the songs on this album have really fantastic standout riffs to me. Tracks like Under the Ocean, Death's Wheel, House of Doom, even Black Trinity. All these tracks just have really great, dark, doomy riffs to them that I just really love. The track Bridge of the Blind is one of the moments on this album that I'm not super hot on overall. This is probably my least favorite song on the entire album. It's slower, it's a lot more stripped back overall. It's definitely trying to be a bit of a change of pace in the album so that this album isn't, just like a full album's worth of doomy, straightforward riffs or something like that. This track is definitely a bit different and a bit more out there, I guess you could say, and I do kind of respect the track in that regard. However, I just don't find this track to be really interesting. It doesn't have a super doomy atmosphere to it, and there's not really any super memorable riffs on this thing either, which, considering the riffs are one of my favorite parts of this band and the rest of this album, it's kind of disappointing that this track wasn't really able to deliver on that front. The vocal performances across this album are pretty great overall. They definitely feel a bit reminiscent of the performances from that debut album, and just overall I would say that this album definitely feels a bit reminiscent of that debut project from this group. The production on this album also allows for all the performances on this thing to come across as very natural. There's not any moment on this thing that sounds really overproduced or anything quite like that. It allows for that very doomy, despair-filled atmosphere that you get with a doom metal album to really sink in rather nicely. But at the same time, you could still clearly hear everything that's really going on in the mix. Overall, I feel like this is a pretty solid doom metal album from Candlemass. I mean, if you're a fan of this band and the sound of music, I definitely could see you liking this project at least to some extent. I don't feel like this is one of the band's best albums or, one of the best albums of the year necessarily or anything quite like that. However, it is still a very good and a very well put together doom metal album at the end of the day. And it's one that, like I said, if you like this style of music, you'll definitely get some enjoyment out of it. Even if you haven't listened to some of this band's more recent output and you're just really into the classic stuff from this band, this isn't necessarily a bad place to jump back in because, like I said, this project definitely, in at least a few ways, calls back to some of the earliest works of this band and manages to, emulate, at least to some extent, some of the vibes that were present on that first project. So yeah, overall, I thought that this was a pretty good project at the end of the day, one that I would definitely recommend. But yeah, overall, that concludes this review here today. It is just my own personal opinion, so if you happen to disagree with anything I've said here today, that is perfectly fine. In fact, feel free to leave your own opinion in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, make sure to leave a like on the video as well, and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content. Things like album reviews, track reviews, things of that sort. So if you happen to like that kind of content, make sure you subscribe. Thank you for watching once again, and stay golden.